The scent of expensive leather and entitlement hung thick in the air of the first-class cabin on British Airways Flight 283 from London to Los Angeles. For Ethan Vance, it was the smell of victory. He'd just closed the biggest deal of his career, a multi-billion-dollar acquisition for Aura Sync Technologies, and this seat, 2A, was his throne. He believed in a natural order, a hierarchy where men like him sat at the front of the plane. But hierarchies can be fragile, and assumptions deadly. What happens when the family you decide to publicly humiliate, the people you deem unworthy of sharing your rarefied air, are the very ones who own the sky you're flying in? Stay with me as we unravel a story of arrogance, prejudice, and the kind of brutal, life-altering karma that is usually reserved for the movies. Ethan Vance was a man sculpted by ambition. At 42, he was the Senior Vice President of Global Marketing for Aura Sync Technologies, a titan in the Silicon Valley software industry. He wasn't just a passenger in first class. He was, in his own mind, a permanent resident of it. His suit was a custom-tailored Tom Ford, his watch a Patek Philippe Calatrava, and his shoes were hand-stitched John Lobbs that cost more than a month's rent for the average person. These weren't just clothes, they were armor, a declaration of his worth. He had clawed his way up from a middle-class background, and he wore his success like a chip on his shoulder, mistaking his good fortune for innate superiority. He believed the world was a brutal meritocracy, and he had won. Anyone who hadn't was, by definition, lazy, incompetent, or simply unworthy. The London trip had been the capstone of his career. He had outmaneuvered competitors from Oracle and SAP, working 18-hour days for 2 weeks straight. He had been ruthless, charming, and brilliant. The final handshake with the British firm's CEO felt like a coronation. Now, on this 10-hour flight home, he was ready to bask in the glow of his achievement. He settled into seat 2A, the plush cream leather sighing under his weight. He accepted a glass of Krug champagne from the flight attendant, Sarah, with a nod so dismissive it bordered on contempt. He didn't thank her. He expected service. It was part of the transaction. He scanned the cabin, his eyes cataloguing the other passengers. A silver-haired man in 1A was clearly old money, reading the Financial Times. A woman across the aisle had the taut, polished look of a Hollywood actress. They belonged. They were his peers. He pulled out his phone and typed a quick, gloating email to his subordinate, Mark. Deal closed. Crushed them. The London office is ours. I'm on BA 2823, enjoying the spoils. Tell the team to have the victory champagne on ice for Monday morning. We're about to own the market. He hit send with a self-satisfied smirk. The boarding process was nearing its end, and Ethan was growing impatient. He wanted the doors closed, the plane in the air, so he could recline his seat and drift off, dreaming of his impending bonus, a figure that would likely have 7 digits. It was then that he heard them. A child's excited chatter, followed by a woman's gentle, "Shh, sweetie, let's find our seats," and a man's low, calm voice. The Sinclair family appeared at the entrance to the first-class cabin. Ethan's eyes narrowed instantly. His internal calculus of worth and belonging went into overdrive, and the results came back negative. The family was black. That was the first thing his prejudiced mind registered. The second was their attire. The father, a tall, well-built man, wore simple grey sweatpants and a comfortable-looking black hoodie. The mother was elegant, but casual in dark jeans and a cashmere sweater. The little girl, maybe 7 or 8, was skipping in bright pink sneakers, and a teenage boy trailed behind them, headphones around his neck, looking bored in the way only a 15-year-old could. They didn't look like they belonged. In Ethan's world, First-class passengers wore their success as visibly as he did. They didn't look like they were heading to a neighborhood barbecue. His lip curled in a silent sneer. This had to be a mistake. Or more likely, he thought with a surge of indignation, it was another case of an airline upgrading a family to appease some diversity quota, or because they'd complained about something. It cheapened the experience. It diluted the exclusivity that he had paid, and earned, a small fortune for. He watched as they found their seats, 2D, 2E, 2F, and 2G, the middle block, right across the aisle from him. The little girl, Lily, was bubbling with excitement. "Daddy, look, the screen is so big. Can I watch The Little Mermaid right now?" The father, James, smiled. "As soon as we're in the air, sweetheart. First you have to get buckled in." Ethan let out a deliberately loud sigh, loud enough for them to hear. He wanted them to feel his disapproval, to understand that their presence was an imposition. The woman, Annika, glanced over at him, her expression neutral but questioning. He met her gaze with a cold stare before turning to look pointedly out the window. This was going to be a very, very long flight. The initial moments after the Sinclair family settled in were a study in simmering tension, at least within the confines of Ethan Vance's mind. Every sound they made grated on his nerves, the rustle of a bag being stowed, the click of a seatbelt, Lily's hushed but still audible giggles. He saw it all as a performance of disrespect, an intrusion into his sanctuary. "Marcus, can you please put your phone on airplane mode?" Annika asked her son. Marcus grunted an affirmative, his eyes glued to the screen. "Now please," James said, his voice soft but carrying an unmistakable note of authority. The boy immediately complied. Ethan watched the exchange with disdain. The casual clothes, the typical family dynamics, it all reinforced his narrative. They were tourists, lottery winners, or beneficiaries of some misplaced corporate generosity. They hadn't earned this. He had. He'd sacrificed family dinners, birthdays, and countless nights of sleep to be in this seat. Their presence felt like a personal insult to his entire life's work. The flight attendant, Sarah, came by to offer the Sinclairs pre-departure beverages. Lily asked for apple juice with a polite, "Please," and her parents requested water. Ethan scoffed internally. Water. Amateurs. They didn't even know how to properly enjoy the perks. He, on the other hand, was already on his second glass of Krug. As the plane taxied to the runway, Lily dropped her small, stuffed unicorn onto the floor. It rolled under her seat and came to a stop just inches from Ethan's expensive shoes. "Oh, Uni," she cried softly. Annika unbuckled her seatbelt to retrieve it, murmuring an apology. "So sorry about that." Ethan didn't respond. He simply pulled his feet back with an exaggerated motion, as if the plush toy might contaminate his $500 loafers. He shot Annika a look that was meant to convey his profound irritation. She met his gaze for a second, a flicker of confusion in her eyes, before she smiled tightly and returned to her seat. The slight did not go unnoticed by her husband. James Sinclair looked over at Ethan, not with anger, but with a quiet, analytical curiosity. It was a look Ethan failed to properly interpret. He saw it not as a warning, but as a challenge from someone who was out of his depth. This emboldened him. Once they were in the air and the seatbelt sign was off, the cabin settled into a familiar rhythm. The clink of cutlery, the low hum of the engines, the murmur of quiet conversation. But Ethan couldn't relax. He was waiting for the next transgression, the next piece of evidence to confirm his prejudice. It came when Lily, now engrossed in her movie and wearing bright pink headphones, let out a delighted laugh. It wasn't loud, certainly no louder than the hearty guffaw from the man in 1A who was watching a comedy, but to Ethan it was like a siren. He unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up, flagging down Sarah with an imperious wave of his hand. "Yes, Mr. Vance?" she asked, her smile professional. He lowered his voice to a conspiratorial, yet carrying whisper. "Is there anything you can do about this?" He gestured vaguely towards the Sinclair family. "This is first class, not a playground. Some of us are trying to work and rest." Sarah's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. She glanced at the Sinclairs. Lily was watching her movie, oblivious. Annika was reading a book, and James was reviewing some papers from a leather portfolio. "Sir, they're not being disruptive." "Her laughing isn't disruptive," Ethan pressed, his voice dripping with condescension. "The constant chatter. I paid over $15,000 for this seat. I expect a certain level of decorum, an ambiance of professionalism." He was speaking just loudly enough for the Sinclairs to hear. He wanted them to. He wanted them to feel the shame of being called out. Annika looked up from her book, her brow furrowed. James placed a hand on her arm, a silent signal to let it go. Sarah, caught in the middle, tried to placate him. "I understand, sir. I'll be sure to monitor the noise levels. Can I get you another glass of champagne?" "No," Ethan snapped, his patience gone. "I want you to talk to them, remind them what cabin they're in." He sat back down, crossing his arms. He felt a sense of power. He was restoring order. He was defending the standards that people like the Sinclairs were eroding. He saw James Sinclair look over at him again. This time there was no curiosity in his eyes. There was just a profound, unnerving stillness, like the calm surface of a deep, cold lake. Ethan mistook this stillness for intimidation. He felt a surge of triumph. The storm was no longer gathering. It was about to break. The confrontation, when it finally happened, was not a sudden explosion, but a venomous, calculated escalation. Ethan, stewing in his self-righteous indignation, felt that the flight attendant's quiet word had been insufficient. The Sinclairs had retreated into a quiet bubble, speaking to each other in low tones, but their very presence continued to offend him. The tipping point was lunch service. The scent of seared salmon and wild rice filled the cabin. Ethan was savoring his meal, paired with a crisp Sancerre, when a small disturbance occurred across the aisle. Lily, trying to cut a piece of her chicken, accidentally nudged her plastic cup of apple juice, which tipped over, splashing a small amount onto the aisle carpet. It wasn't a major spill, but the reaction was immediate. "Oh, honey," Annika said, quickly grabbing napkins. "I'm sorry, Mummy." Lily's voice was filled with distress. James calmly reassured her. "It's okay, sweetie. It was an accident." He and Annika efficiently cleaned up the small puddle. Sarah rushed over with more napkins and a quiet offer to help. The whole incident was over in less than a minute. But for Ethan, this was the final straw. It was the confirmation of everything he believed. They were careless, clumsy, and did not belong here. This was the opening he had been waiting for. He pushed his meal tray away, the screech of porcelain on the stand startling the quiet cabin. He stood up, towering over the seated family. "That's it. I've had enough," he announced, his voice slicing through the air. Every head in the small cabin turned towards him. James Sinclair looked up at him, his expression unreadable. "Excuse me. You heard me," Ethan spat, pointing a finger at them. "First the noise, now this mess. This is a first-class cabin, not a daycare center. I don't know how you people managed to get these tickets, whether it was some affirmative action handout, or you cashed in a lifetime of frequent flyer miles. But you clearly have no idea how to behave." Annika's face, which had been a mask of patience, hardened. "Sir, it was a small accident. There is absolutely no need for you to speak to us or about us in that tone." "Oh, I think there is," Ethan sneered, his arrogance swelling As he felt the eyes of the other passengers on him, he felt like a crusader for standards. People pay a premium to fly up here precisely to avoid this kind of chaos. They pay for peace, for quiet, for an environment conducive to business. They don't pay to listen to your child screaming or to have your sticky juice spilled all over the place. My daughter did not scream, and she is quieter than you are right now, James said, his voice dangerously low and steady. He remained seated, a deliberate choice that somehow gave him more authority than Ethan, who was standing and agitated. I suggest you sit down and finish your meal. The calm dismissal was like gasoline on a fire. Ethan's face flushed a deep red. "Don't you dare talk down to me," he snarled. "I am a senior vice president at one of the biggest tech firms in the world. I am closing deals that are worth more than you'll ever see in your life. This seat, I earned it. What do you do? Let me guess. A diversity hire in some mid-level management position? A professional athlete who got one lucky contract." The racial undertones were now explicit, hanging poisonously in the cabin air. The teenage son, Marcus, who had been silent until now, clenched his fists. "Hey, you can't talk to my dad like that. Marcus, stay out of this," James commanded gently, his eyes never leaving Ethan's. Ethan laughed, a short, ugly sound. "See? You can't even control your own children. This is exactly what I'm talking about. A complete lack of respect." He turned his fury on Sarah, the flight attendant, who was hovering nearby, looking horrified. "And you! I told you to handle this, and you did nothing. I want them moved. Put them in premium economy, or back in coach where they belong. I'm a platinum executive flyer with this airline. I expect my concerns to be taken seriously." Sarah found her voice. "Sir, I cannot move a passenger who has paid for a first-class ticket. The family has done nothing wrong. You are the one causing a disturbance." "I'm causing a disturbance? By demanding the service I paid for?" Ethan was practically shouting now. The co-pilot had cracked open the cockpit door, alerted by the commotion. James Sinclair slowly folded his napkin and placed it on his tray. He looked Ethan up and down, a process that took several seconds, his gaze lingering on the expensive watch and the tailored suit. When he finally spoke, his voice was devoid of anger. It was something far more chilling. Disappointment. "You have no idea who you're talking to," he said, not as a threat, but as a simple statement of fact. "But that doesn't actually matter. What matters is the character you've shown us, the ugliness you've displayed in front of my children, in front of everyone on this plane. You should be ashamed of yourself." For a split second, the sheer, unshakable confidence in James's voice gave Ethan pause. A flicker of doubt entered his mind. Who was this man? But his arrogance quickly extinguished it. It was a bluff, an attempt by a man out of his depth to save face. "I'm not ashamed of anything," Ethan shot back. "I'm just saying what everyone else here is thinking. Now, are you going to move, or do I need to have the captain get involved?" "You will do nothing of the sort," James replied, his voice hardening for the first time. "You will sit down in your seat, and you will not speak to my family again for the remainder of this flight. Is that clear?" The raw command in his tone finally broke through Ethan's rage. He was momentarily stunned into silence. Defeated by an opponent who refused to play his game, he glared at James one last time before slumping back into his seat, his heart pounding with adrenaline and fury. He had made his point. He had won. Or so he thought. The cabin was silent, but the real consequences of his eruption were just beginning to coalesce, silently in the rarefied air, 35,000 feet above the Atlantic. The remainder of the flight passed in a thick, suffocating silence. The air in the first-class cabin, once a symbol of comfort and luxury, was now charged with the static of the ugly confrontation. The other passengers avoided making eye contact with either Ethan or the Sinclair family, retreating into their headphones and eye masks. The flight attendants performed their duties with a tense, brittle professionalism, their interactions with Ethan clipped and minimalist. Ethan, for his part, tried to project an aura of victory. He reclined his seat, put on his noise-cancelling Bose headphones, and pretended to watch a movie. But he couldn't focus. The scene kept replaying in his mind. He dissected every word, every gesture, reinforcing his own righteousness. He felt a grim satisfaction. He had stood up for his principles. He had put those people in their place. They had been silent for the rest of the flight, hadn't they? That was proof he had been right. To validate his feelings, he pulled out his laptop. Under the guise of doing more work, he connected to the plane's spotty Wi-Fi and opened his personal email. He needed to vent, to share his victory with someone who would understand his worldview. He composed a new email to his friend, another high-powered executive at a different company. Subject: You won't believe the flight. Home. Hey Dave, London was a massive success, as expected. But the flight back has been a trip. I'm in first, obviously, and I get stuck next to this family that clearly won some kind of lottery to be here. Loud, messy, completely clueless about how to behave. It was like flying with the Beverly Hillbillies, if the Hillbillies were beneficiaries of some corporate diversity initiative. I finally had to put my foot down, had a bit of a confrontation. The dad, trying to act all tough, got all quiet and tried to stare me down. You know the type. Thinks he's got gravitas because he can puff his chest out. I basically had to explain the rules of civilized society to them. The whole cabin went quiet. It was uncomfortable for a bit. But sometimes you have to be the one to say something, right? You have to protect the sanctity of these spaces from people who don't belong. Anyway, can't wait to celebrate the deal on Monday. The bonus on this one is going to be epic. Best, Ethan. He read it over, a smug smile on his face. It was perfect. It framed him as the hero, the guardian of standards. He hit send, just as the Wi-Fi flickered and died. The email sat in his outbox, waiting to be delivered upon landing. Across the aisle, the atmosphere was starkly different. Lily had fallen asleep, her head resting on her mother's lap, the forgotten unicorn clutched in her hand. Marcus stared out the window, his jaw tight, the music from his headphones a shield against the world. He had felt the sting of Ethan's words more acutely than anyone. He'd heard those kinds of insults whispered in school hallways, seen them in the comments on social media. But to have them thrown at his father, his hero, with such public venom, was a new kind of wound. Annika stroked her daughter's hair, her book lying unopened on her lap. Her gaze was fixed on her husband. James Sinclair hadn't touched the papers in his portfolio since the incident. He was looking straight ahead, his face a mask of calm control. But Annika knew him better than anyone. She could see the faint tension in his jaw, the deep, focused look in his eyes. He wasn't angry. He was processing. He was calculating. James was a man who had faced far greater challenges than an arrogant bully on an airplane. He had navigated hostile boardrooms, outmaneuvered corporate raiders, and shattered racial barriers in an industry still dominated by white men. He had built AuraSync Technologies from a small startup into a global powerhouse through sheer intellect, relentless drive, and an uncanny ability to read people. And he had read Ethan Vance perfectly. He saw a man whose arrogance was a brittle shell covering a deep-seated insecurity, a man who measured his own worth by devaluing others, a man who saw the world not in terms of human beings, but in terms of a hierarchy. He was desperate to remain atop, and most critically, a man who worked for him. He knew Ethan Vance's name, of course. He was the star marketer, the rainmaker who had just closed the landmark deal in London. James had even reviewed his file in preparation for the post-deal board meeting scheduled for Monday. He knew of Vance's ambition, his ruthlessness, and the rumors of his abrasive management style. But he had never witnessed the man's character firsthand. Until now. He knew what he had to do. It would not be an act of personal revenge. Revenge was petty and emotional. This would be a business decision, a leadership decision. The culture of a company was its foundation. It was built from the top down. A senior executive, a leader, was a representative of that culture, in and out of the office. What Ethan had displayed was a rot that, if left unchecked, could poison everything James had built. He caught his son's eye. Marcus looked at him, his face a mixture of hurt and anger. James gave him a very slight, almost imperceptible nod. It was a silent promise. This will be handled. Marcus understood. He leaned his head back against the seat, the tension in his shoulders easing just a little. The cold, quiet hours of the flight crawled by, each tick of the clock bringing them closer to Los Angeles, and closer to a reckoning Ethan Vance could never have imagined. The descent into Los Angeles began as the California coastline emerged from the morning haze, a sprawling tapestry of lights and concrete. The sterile, pre-recorded announcement from the captain broke the cabin's long silence, signaling the end of the ordeal. Ethan felt a renewed sense of vigor. He was back on home turf. He stretched, a performative gesture of a man relaxed and in charge. He glanced across the aisle. The Sinclair family was quietly preparing for landing, waking their daughter, gathering their belongings. They pointedly ignored him, which he interpreted as a sign of their defeat and shame. Perfect. As the plane touched down with a gentle bump, Ethan was already unbuckling his seatbelt, eager to be the first one off. He had a car service waiting. He needed to get to his sleek, minimalist mansion in the Hollywood Hills, shower, and prepare for his triumphant return to the office on Monday. He stood up the moment the plane docked at the gate, grabbing his carry-on from the overhead compartment. He positioned himself in the aisle, effectively blocking the Sinclairs, ensuring he would disembark first. It was one last, petty assertion of dominance. He strode down the jet bridge without a backward glance, the manufactured confidence of a victor in his step. Walking through the terminal at LAX, he felt the familiar buzz of importance. His phone reconnected to the network and immediately began to chime with notifications, emails, texts, alerts. The triumphant email he'd sent to his subordinate, Mark, had gone through. Mark had replied instantly, "Boss! Incredible news, the office is already buzzing. Monday is going to be epic. They should build you a statue." Ethan smiled. A statue. That sounded about right. He followed the signs for baggage claim and ground transportation. As he neared the exit for private car services, he scanned the crowd of drivers holding signs. His eyes passed over names like Ackerman, Patel, and Hayes until he saw his own, Vance. A crisp, professional driver stood waiting, but then another sign caught his eye. It was held by a different driver, standing just a few feet away from his own. The sign was a single, stark word, printed in bold black letters. Sinclair. Ethan froze for a microsecond. Sinclair. The name was not exceptionally rare, but the coincidence, right here, right now, was jarring. His mind raced. Could it be them? No, impossible. Their clothes, their demeanor. It didn't fit. A private car service of this caliber was for people like him. Just then, the Sinclair family emerged from the terminal. They looked tired from the long flight, but they walked with an unhurried grace. James was carrying a sleeping Lily, and Marcus was rolling their carry-on bags. They walked directly towards the driver, holding the Sinclair sign. The driver, a man in a sharp black suit, immediately straightened up, his expression shifting to one of deep respect. Good morning, Mr. Sinclair. I hope you had a pleasant flight. It was educational, Robert, James replied, his voice calm. He gently transferred the sleeping Lily into Annika's arms. Is everything ready for the Monday morning call? Yes, sir. All documents have been forwarded to the board members. The video link for the London team is confirmed. Everything is set for 8 a.m. sharp. Ethan watched, hidden behind a pillar, his heart beginning to hammer against his ribs. Mr. Sinclair, board members, the London team. The words echoed in his head, colliding with the events of the flight. It couldn't be. It was a nightmare coincidence. There must be thousands of executives named Sinclair in California. But there was only one CEO of Aura Sync Technologies, a man who was famously private, who rarely appeared in the media, preferring to let his company's success speak for itself. A man whose name, Ethan now realized with a dawning, sickening horror, was James Sinclair. He had never met the CEO in person. The company was massive, with offices all over the globe. James Sinclair was a legendary, almost mythical figure who resided at the very top of the corporate food chain, a man Ethan had only ever seen in a few heavily retouched photos in the company's annual report. Photos that were 5 years old. In them, he was clean-shaven and wearing a suit. The man on the plane had a beard and was wearing a hoodie. But now, seeing him in the flesh, stripped of the context of the airplane confrontation, Ethan saw it. The same confident posture, the same intelligent, piercing eyes. A wave of nausea washed over him. The expensive champagne he'd drunk now tasted like acid in his throat. He felt the blood drain from his face. The email, the gloating, arrogant, prejudiced email he had sent to his friend. It was a digital smoking gun, a detailed confession of his own character flaws. He frantically fumbled for his phone, his hands shaking. He had to recall it. He had to delete it. But it was too late. The world of instant communication that his own industry had built was now his personal executioner. The message was sent. The words were out there. And the man he had spent hours tormenting, the man whose family he had insulted, the man he had dismissed as an unworthy affirmative action hire, was the same man who held his entire career, his reputation, and his 7-digit bonus in the palm of his hand. His own driver approached him. "Mr. Vance? Are you all right, sir? You look pale." Ethan couldn't speak. He could only stare at the Sinclair family as they were escorted to a sleek, black Mercedes S-Class, the very symbol of the world he was so proud to inhabit. As the car pulled away, James Sinclair looked out the rear window, and for a brief, terrifying moment, his eyes met Ethan's. There was no anger in his gaze. There was no triumph. There was only the calm, final finality of a judge who had already passed sentence. The weekend was a blur of self-inflicted torment for Ethan Vance. Sleep offered no escape, as his dreams were haunted by James Sinclair's calm, disappointed eyes, and the sound of his own venomous words echoing in the confines of an airplane cabin. He replayed the confrontation 100 times, each time feeling a fresh wave of panic and regret. He tried to rationalize, to build a defense in his mind. It was a misunderstanding. He was tired from the business trip. He would apologize. He could fix this. But deep down, he knew he couldn't. The sheer magnitude of his miscalculation was crushing. It wasn't just that he had insulted his boss. He had revealed the core of his character to the one man who had the absolute power to judge it. He spent hours online, frantically researching James Sinclair. He found articles praising his visionary leadership, his commitment to diversity and inclusion, and his generous philanthropic work. He read about the Sinclair Foundation, a charity run by his wife, Dr. Annika Sinclair, a renowned pediatrician who specialized in childhood oncology. The woman he had sneered at was a healer of sick children. The family he had deemed clueless were pillars of the very community his company claimed to serve. By Monday morning, Ethan was a wreck. He dressed in his most impeccable suit, the Tom Ford armor, now feeling like a cheap costume. As he drove his Porsche to the AuraSync headquarters, a gleaming glass tower in Silicon Valley, every billboard, every radio ad for his own company felt like a personal accusation. He walked into the lobby, forcing a confident smile onto his face. The receptionist, a young woman he'd never bothered to learn the name of, greeted him. "Good morning, Mr. Vance. Congratulations on the London deal." "Thank you," he managed to say, his voice hoarse. As he walked towards the executive elevators, his phone buzzed. It was an email from the CEO's executive assistant. The subject line was stark. "Mandatory meeting, boardroom, 8:00 a.m. His blood ran cold. It wasn't a celebratory meeting about his deal. The summons was too formal, too immediate. His heart pounded in his chest as the elevator ascended to the top floor, each chime marking a step closer to his fate. He arrived at the boardroom at exactly 8:00 a.m. The heavy oak doors were closed. He took a deep breath, straightened his tie, and pushed them open. The scene inside was worse than anything he had imagined. The long mahogany table was occupied by the entire executive board of AuraSync Technologies. The chief financial officer, the chief technology officer, the head of human resources, and several other senior VPs were all there, their faces grim and unreadable. They looked at him as he entered, then quickly averted their gazes. There was no camaraderie, no congratulations. There was only a cold, clinical distance, and at the head of the table, in the CEO's chair, sat James Sinclair. He was not wearing a hoodie and sweatpants. Today, he was dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, a crisp white shirt, and a simple, elegant tie. He radiated an aura of absolute power and control that was far more intimidating than any display of anger could ever be. Dr. Annika Sinclair sat in a chair slightly behind him, not as a victim, but as a silent, powerful witness. Ethan's mouth went dry. "James, Mr. Sinclair, James held up a hand, silencing him. "Sit down, Ethan." His voice was calm, but it held the resonance of command. Ethan shakily took the only empty seat, directly opposite James, at the far end of the long table. He felt like a prisoner in the dock. James let the silence hang in the air for a full minute, forcing Ethan to endure the weight of every pair of eyes in the room. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured and clear. "We are here this morning to discuss a serious incident that calls into question the leadership and character of a senior member of this company," James began, his eyes locked on Ethan. "As you all know, AuraSync is more than just a software company. We have built our brand on 3 core pillars: innovation, integrity, and inclusion. These are not just words on a poster in the lobby. They are the standards by which we operate and the promise we make to our employees and our customers." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Over the weekend," James continued, "it was brought to my attention that one of our executives, while representing this company, failed to uphold these values in the most egregious way possible." He looked around the table at the other board members. "On Friday, I, along with my wife and our 2 children, were passengers on British Airways, Flight 283, returning from London. We were seated in the first-class cabin. Also in that cabin was Mr. Ethan Vance." A collective, sharp intake of breath could be heard around the room. The puzzle pieces clicked into place for everyone. The vague meeting summons now had a terrifyingly specific context. "Mr. Vance," James said, his gaze returning to Ethan, took it upon himself to pass judgment on my family based on our appearance and the color of our skin. He made a series of assumptions about our right to be in that cabin, and when his prejudices were not validated, he escalated the situation into a loud, demeaning, and racist tirade. He recounted the incident with cold, factual precision. He mentioned the sighing, the glares, the comments to the flight attendant, and finally, the public eruption over a spilled cup of juice. He repeated some of the phrases Ethan had used. Affirmative action handout. People like you. Back in coach where they belong. Each word landed on Ethan like a physical blow. Mr. Vance's behavior was not just rude, James stated. It was hateful. It was predicated on a belief that some people are inherently less worthy than others. That is an ideology that has no place in our society, and it most certainly has no place in the leadership of this company. He gestured to the head of HR, a woman named Linda. Linda, do you have the document I requested? Linda nodded, her face grim. She slid a tablet across the table. James tapped the screen. Projected onto the large monitor at the end of the room was an email. Ethan's email. The one he had sent to his friend Dave. The entire boardroom read his gloating, prejudiced words in stunned silence. Like flying with the Beverly Hillbillies. Beneficiaries of some corporate diversity initiative. Sometimes you have to be the one to say something, to protect the sanctity of these spaces from people who don't belong. The evidence was irrefutable, written in his own arrogant words. He had not only committed the act, he had celebrated it. He had documented his own character failure for the world to see. Ethan Vance's world did not just crack. It shattered into a million pieces, right there, in the silent, cold judgment of the AuraSync boardroom. The silence that followed the display of the email was absolute. It was a heavy, damning silence, filled with the unspoken condemnation of every person in the room. Ethan Vance sat frozen, his face ashen. There was no defense. There were no excuses. He had been exposed, utterly and completely, by his own hand. James Sinclair let the weight of the moment settle before he spoke again. His voice was no longer just the voice of a CEO. It was the voice of a father, a husband, and a leader profoundly disappointed. This email, he said, gesturing to the screen, was not intercepted. It was not hacked. It was forwarded to our head of HR on Saturday morning by its recipient, David Miller, who was, and I quote, appalled and disgusted by its contents. He felt that the leadership of AuraSync needed to be aware of the character of the man representing them. Ethan felt a fresh stab of betrayal, but it was quickly overwhelmed by the tidal wave of his own shame. Even his own friend, his peer, had found his actions indefensible. The question before us, James continued, addressing the board, is not about a personal insult. My family will be fine. We have dealt with this kind of prejudice before, and sadly, we will likely deal with it again. This is about the integrity of AuraSync Technologies. How can we ask our employees to trust a leader who harbors such blatant contempt for others? How can we sell our products to a global, diverse market when one of our senior executives believes in protecting the sanctity of spaces from people he deems unworthy? How can we champion our diversity and inclusion programs when a man in this room sees them as nothing more than a handout? He paused, looking directly at Ethan, his gaze unwavering. The deal you closed in London was impressive, Ethan. On paper, you are a star performer. But we are not a company that values profits over people. We are not a company that rewards success at the cost of our soul. Your actions on that flight were a betrayal of every value we stand for. Ethan finally found his voice, a weak, desperate whisper. "Mr. Sinclair, James, I am so sorry. I was stressed. I was arrogant. I made a terrible, terrible mistake. It's not who I am." "Isn't it?" Annika Sinclair spoke for the first time, her voice quiet but carrying immense weight. "I'm a doctor, Mr. Vance. I diagnose things for a living, and what I saw on that plane wasn't a mistake. It was a symptom of a deeper illness. You didn't just see a family, you saw a stereotype. You didn't see my daughter, you saw an inconvenience. You looked at my husband, a man who has built an empire through brilliance and hard work, and you saw someone who didn't belong. That isn't a mistake. That, I'm afraid, is exactly who you are." Her words were calm, clinical, and utterly devastating. They left no room for argument. James nodded slowly. "The decision of this board is unanimous. Ethan Vance, your employment with AuraSync Technologies is terminated, effective immediately. Your stock options are rescinded as per the character clause in your executive contract. You will be paid for your last 2 weeks, but you will not receive a bonus for the London deal, as your subsequent actions have brought the company into disrepute." He gestured towards the door. "Security will now escort you to your office to collect your personal belongings. You will then be escorted from the building. Your corporate accounts have already been deactivated. We wish you the best in your future endeavors." The final sentence was a corporate formality, delivered with ice-cold precision. It was over. In the space of 10 minutes, Ethan's entire world had been dismantled. His career, his reputation, his financial future, all of it, gone. He stood up, his legs unsteady. He looked around the table at the faces of the people who had been his colleagues. No one would meet his eye. He was no longer one of them. He was a pariah. As 2 security guards entered the room, he looked at James Sinclair one last time, searching for any sign of personal victory or malice. He found none. He saw only a deep, weary resolve. The look of a leader who had been forced to perform a painful but necessary surgery to save the health of the whole organism. The walk to his office was the longest walk of his life. The news had already spread like wildfire through the company's internal channels. People peered out from their cubicles, their faces a mixture of shock and morbid curiosity. The man who had been a king just yesterday was now being led to his corporate execution. When he reached his sprawling corner office, the one with the panoramic view of the city, he found a single cardboard box waiting for him. As he numbly packed his personal effects, a photo of his parents, a few industry awards that now seemed meaningless, he understood the brutal, karmic justice of it all. He had judged a family's worth based on their external appearance, and now his own life was being stripped down to its essentials, the expensive trapping of his success torn away, leaving only the empty, flawed man underneath. The empire he built on arrogance had crumbled to dust, all because he couldn't stand the sight of a happy child and her family in a place he felt they didn't belong. The drive away from the AuraSync tower was a study in surreal silence. Ethan Vance's Porsche, a machine built for speed and noise, crept through Silicon Valley traffic as if in a funeral procession. The buttery leather of the seats, which usually felt like a second skin of success, now seemed to suffocate him. The world outside the tinted windows looked the same, sun-drenched, busy, indifferent. But for Ethan, the entire axis had shifted. He wasn't a king returning to his castle. He was an exile banished from his own kingdom. He arrived at his minimalist mansion in the Hollywood Hills, a structure of glass and steel overlooking the city. The cavernous, empty rooms, once a testament to his sparse and disciplined taste, now felt like a mausoleum. There was no victory champagne waiting. There were no congratulatory calls. There was only a profound, echoing silence. The first 48 hours were a frantic blur of denial. He called his lawyer, a shark named Alan, who listened to the story and gave him the grim prognosis. "Ethan, they have you dead to rights. The character clause in your executive contract is ironclad. Your own email is Exhibit A. A lawsuit would be career suicide. What's left of it, anyway." He tried calling the other board members, men he had shared drinks and golf games with. Every call went to voicemail. His texts were met with silence. His network, a web of connections painstakingly built over 2 decades, had been severed with a single, clean cut. He was radioactive, and no one wanted to be caught in the fallout. The official news broke on Tuesday morning. Orasync issued a crisp press release announcing Ethan Vance's departure to pursue other opportunities. It was a standard corporate euphemism, but the tech world knew how to read between the lines. Within an hour, the real story, leaked from an internal source, hit a major tech journalism site, The Verge. The headline was brutal and direct. Orasync Marketing SVP Ethan Vance fired after racist confrontation with CEO's family on flight. The article included anonymous quotes from employees describing his abrasive style and from a supposed passenger who witnessed the event. But the real bombshell came later that day when a different blog published a screenshot of his email to Dave Miller. His own words, laid bare for the world to see, became the engine of his public immolation. He became a Twitter trend. Cut Ethan Vance and Agent Orasync Karma dominated the conversation. He was turned into a meme, his face photoshopped onto pictures of entitled Karens, his quotes plastered over images of luxury. He was no longer a person. He was a symbol of corporate arrogance and racial prejudice. Every comment, every share, every laughing emoji was another nail in the coffin of his reputation. Meanwhile, in a quiet, tree-lined suburb, the Sinclair family was having dinner. Lily was chattering about her day at school, while Marcus was showing his mother something on his phone. It was a normal, peaceful evening. After dinner, as James helped his son with his calculus homework, Marcus paused. "Dad," he said, looking up from his textbook, "that guy from the plane. I saw the news. Everyone at school is talking about it. Did you enjoy firing him?" James put his pen down and looked at his son thoughtfully. He saw the genuine curiosity in his eyes, the need to understand the complex morality of the situation. "No, Marcus. I didn't enjoy it," he said, his voice low and serious. "Taking away a person's livelihood, even when it's necessary, is a heavy thing. It's a failure. It means he failed his responsibilities, and it means the system that promoted him failed to see his character flaws sooner." "But he deserved it," Marcus insisted. "The way he talked to you. To Mom." "He absolutely earned the consequences," James agreed. "But you have to understand, this wasn't about revenge. Revenge is a hot, messy emotion. This was about responsibility. My primary responsibility is to the health and culture of my company. Ethan's mindset, that prejudice, that arrogance, is a poison. If I, as the CEO, allow that poison to exist in my leadership team, what message does that send to the thousands of people who work for us? What does it say to our customers? Power isn't a weapon for personal fights, son. It's a tool. And sometimes you have to use that tool to cut away a sickness to keep the whole body healthy. It was a sad, but necessary, procedure." That conversation never reached Ethan, but its consequences defined the rest of his life. The months that followed were a slow, grinding descent. He put his mansion on the market. Its upkeep was unsustainable without his massive income. Headhunters who had hounded him for years suddenly had no promising opportunities. He was forced to hire a reputation management firm to try and scrub the internet of his story, a futile and expensive effort. 6 months after the flight, Ethan Vance found himself in the economy cabin of a domestic flight from LAX to Chicago for a low-level consulting interview he knew he wouldn't get. The seat was cramped, the air stale. A young family settled into the row next to him. Their toddler was fussy, and the parents were trying their best to soothe him. The old Ethan would have been seething, plugging in his noise-cancelling headphones and stewing in silent rage. But as he sat there, a man stripped of his armor, he just watched them. He saw the father gently rocking the child, the mother whispering a soft lullaby. He saw not an inconvenience, but a family. He saw not a disruption to his peace, but a small, universal moment of human struggle and love. For the first time, he didn't feel superior. He didn't feel entitled. He felt nothing but a hollow ache of regret. The flight took off, and Ethan Vance, a former king, now just a passenger in seat 27B, closed his eyes and finally, truly, understood the price of his arrogance. The sky he once thought he owned was vast and indifferent, and he was just a speck within it, learning to fly all over again. The story of Ethan Vance serves as a chilling, modern-day parable. It's a raw look at how the prejudice we harbor in our hearts can become the architect of our own downfall. In a world that is more connected than ever, we can no longer afford the arrogance of assumptions. The person you belittle in a coffee shop, the family you judge on an airplane, or the subordinate you dismiss in a meeting could be connected to your life in ways you can't possibly imagine. Karma, in this story, wasn't a mystical force. It was a direct and brutal consequence of one man's actions delivered by the very people he sought to diminish. His story is a powerful reminder that true status isn't measured by the price of your watch or your seat number on a plane, but by the content of your character and the kindness you show to others, regardless of who you think they are. If this story of arrogance and its swift, hard consequences resonated with you, please hit that like button to help us share it with more people. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for more true-to-life stories about choices and the karma that follows. Thank you for listening.